Thank you for listening to Men Talk Ubuntu podcast and being a valued member of our community. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube, Instagram, and other social media now for access to our latest updates. DM us and let us know what your mental health is on a scale of 1 to 5. Take care.
So all of our unmet needs, all of our wounds, the stuff we didn't get fixed, the stuff we were unable to fix when we were younger. If you think about carrying a couple of suitcases and we go into those relationships without even knowing, and we're scanning for somebody that fits this imago, as we put it, and that imago is full of all the stuff that our caregivers modeled to us, how they relate to us, how they communicated with us, how they didn't communicate with us, the wounds that were left, all that stuff. So we look for somebody that's our familiar, and that for me sounds really obvious as well, but we don't know any of this. So we find something like, okay, you fit my familiar, you're amazing. But our child, out of awareness, is going, right, now I can get my needs met. All the stuff that didn't get sorted when I was younger, this person's going to meet all my needs for me. Amazing. So like to your point, Shai, we start loading all this expectation and needs, and all of our old wounds get bared into the relationship without either partner knowing what's really going on. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, what's all this? And there's that dynamic of, well, I'm not getting my needs met. They're not fulfilling everything I expected them to. They're not, I put them on a pedestal and I had all these hopes, but it's all of our unmet childhood stuff that's playing out. We're playing psychological games to get our needs met, and they're not working, and we just end up in a really difficult situation. So I thought I'd bring some context to that in terms of what we take into relationships as well.
Amazing you say that, because as you were going through that, I was thinking, okay, two different people, or as you know, since I like computers and IT, two different operating system. One's a Mac OS operating system, the other one's a Windows, right? Try and get them to communicate and be together. There will be obviously, crashes and all sorts that will happen along the way. And let's be honest, at the end of the day, we're human and we all come with baggage one way or another, regardless. There's no such thing as a perfect human being, no matter whether you're privileged or not. Regardless, everyone has their own flaws. But with that whole model, the question I have is that, irrespective of the wounds and the things that are unmet and the suitcases, what do you think is the foundation to kind of consistently have that healthy relationship, or make it okay? 100% is most probably unrealistic, but even if it was like 70-80%, where there's little peaks, but there's there's a lot more healthiness to make sure there's that sustainability. Because I think even I recall reading a statistic saying that previously our parents' generation, they stayed with each other for so long even though they weren't happy, whereas now people don't stay with each because they don't know how to. They've got two different operating systems and they don't know how to kind of figure out what the wounds are, the unmet needs, and speak. I think the biggest thing is that they don't know how to communicate and overcome certain things, and as you said, people become defensive. So I'm really intrigued to get that insight, to have that long sustainable healthy, or consistent trying, and at both ends where it's equal, because I think even our listeners would love to know that.
Okay. And I'll come back to the model that I work with for clients, the Imago model, because for me I'll tell you about it and why I think it works and why I think this is the core of any relationship. Because ordinarily in relationships, one partner needs more and talks more and shares more, and one partner is more closed off. That's a really typical dynamic. It's not always the case, but it's really, really familiar. And so you've got one person who wants to talk more, but maybe doesn't know how to express it. And the other person, when they're talked at and they don't know how to express themselves, they back off. So you get them both moving that way. So part of it is to bring them back into the middle. So one person steps forward and the other person steps back a bit so they can meet in that space. I really do think it's about the dialogue, and it's about how you talk. So I believe things become a thing if they're either not spoken about or spoken about in the wrong way, i.e. the defense and attack way. So I believe it's creating a safe space where you can both say what's really going on for you, and learning. And I always say learning and practice, because this is learning and practice is massive for all the therapy that I do with individuals and couples. It's all about learning a new way. So practicing to create a safe space where you can both say, right, this has been going on for me. And so that might be quite tough for the person who actually ordinarily just goes into their shell. So they've got to learn to come forward. That's their growth area. And the other person's got to learn to maybe hold some of that back as well, to not say everything and not tell the other person what they're thinking, because that's another one. You know, if we're told what we're thinking, you know, we're just going to retreat again. So learning to create a safe space and practicing to have this safe space where you can both say, right, this is going on for me, and the other person properly hears and says, yeah, I get it, and I just want to hear you out, and I get it, and I'm going to validate, and then I'm going to empathize, knowing what I know. The other bit I always say to clients as well, and that really, I say this because it really made a difference to me as well, is we're never truly going to understand the other person. Back to what we were saying about the two different operating systems, we're never going to truly, like Windows and Mac don't truly understand each other. But it's about, actually, if you were to, you know, in IT terms, getting them to work together, it's about them validating each other. They don't have to work together and fully understand, because they're different. And so it's actually teaching couples and clients that you don't have to fully understand the other person, because you just won't. You are separate human beings, but it's about hearing them out and saying, I get you, I've heard you. So I think in my experience, in my opinion, that's the bit. If both partners can learn to create that space and practice that space, and then for me, that's that safety, that's that trust, that's that communication. And learning that if there's something that's really upset you and pissed you off, it's like, okay, I'm not going to talk about it now, but let's wait till we're in that safe space, rather than jumping on the partner and saying, you've done this. And again, you're going to get back into that defense and attack. It's knowing that actually we can talk about that when the time's right, when we're both ready to hear each other. Does that answer your question, Ray?
No, definitely. And what I could hear from that, I think it's safe to say that what I got from that, to have a healthy relationship, it's not about, it's about putting your guard down and just inspiring each other to basically be better in that safe environment. And whether one person's reactive or the other person isn't, it's just about finding that safe balance and growing together.
Yeah, and the bit that's important as well, and as part of therapy, the couples therapy, is actually them getting to the bottom of what their childhood stuff is as well. So, you know, because I think there are tons of approaches out there that ordinarily say, well, you know, you've recognized it, so now just change it. But for me, there's more than just recognition. I believe you've got to go back to go forward. So it's all well and good knowing, like, okay, that happens for me, but I really believe it's important to know the why. And that's where some of the adult child stuff comes in. It's about helping you understand your inner child, what your inner child's got stored, what those emotions are, what you've learned, what you haven't learned, and all those things. So it's understanding the why as well. So the therapy that I do with couples is about helping them understand their whys, and then, you know, and then we move towards change, and then we move towards something different. So I felt that was really important, because it's not just about, okay, this is happening, we're going to do it differently, because I don't believe you can unless you've worked through that in the right way.
Just dropping jewels, like that's amazing. Like, I think it really hits home, particularly even with understanding, but with those two key words of, are you in defense or attack, or defense and attack? Because let's not just say communication is the key, but that literally, if you're in defense or attack, no matter what that person does, they're not getting in, or they're not getting through, period. Right? Whatever they try, you're defending against it, and you're trying to attack them back. there's only one way that ends, with one person having to leave the situation. There's no resolving it. And I think that's a powerful way to think about things. I was thinking about it with certain relationships, whether, you know, intimate or personal, anything like that. And just those points where, oh, was I being defensive, or was I trying to attack them? And trying to think, what would the opposite way be? Like, to just say to them, can you open up, or can I open up and share this? And not often being able to do that, if I'm quite honest. Because yeah, it's probably more easy to close off and push away than to start exposing things and be vulnerable and all this stuff. So that was really amazing to hear for me. And I won't lie, you've been making me go back into like high school days. You get, don't know where this has come from. Like, from the moment Ray asked about validation, like when did you first have validation? When, perhaps in your younger years? I was surprised by the thought that came to mind. I'm not going to put her name out there, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. But...
Are you worried she might be listening?
You never know. But it was like, I literally, when I was younger, as probably most young men, teen years, I think this was, yeah. So let's, yeah. I most people, you know, we're after one thing around that age time, right? And I remember I was in this relationship, and unexpected, unsolicited, I was just surprised me with presents, like just to show appreciation for me, type thing, like, oh, you know, a little cologne, a little, you know, little teddy bear, just some lovey-dovey stuff, you know. But it was just given without, it was a complete surprise. And that moment for me, yeah, it was like an immense moment of validation. And just, not like I like gifts or anything like that. I don't, and I don't usually like that kind of attention type thing. But the way it was given was very much like, no, I appreciate you. And it was one of the relationships that idea of, also when you were mentioning about being perfect or putting someone on a pedestal, because like, if you put someone on a pedestal, there's also usually only one way. They're going to fall short and fall off it. If you put pressure on yourself to be perfect, then even unbeknownst to the other person, you might do something wrong, and now you're beating yourself up because you're like, I've got to be perfect. I've messed up. I've ruined the relationship. And the other person is like, nah, this is normal. We're different people. You know, we're going to clash. Two different operating systems. But you've gone, no, we're supposed to be the same operating system. We're supposed to be perfect. So now, no matter what they do for you, that relationship is pretty much done, and everything else might start to prove that from that point forward, because they've ruined the perfection. It doesn't even have to be you've ruined the perfection. They've done it as well. So I was thinking back to that, and I was like, wow, just thinking to that, and then trying to think of other moments, more intimate moments. The podcast comes out quite early, so we won't give too much of that intimate detail. We might have to do a late night special. But it made me think really about that, and how it depends how you've come into your own relationship as an adult now, or, you know, in these later years, and being able to express what you want, and being able to, like you were saying, talk about what's happened in your childhood and whether you're comfortable with that. So I guess it depends how strong the connection is with this person, and maybe where the relationship's supposed to go. Because I don't know, I don't like people knowing my business anyway, but it takes something, I think, to be that open. Like, I'm not going to be telling people about, you know, this teenage thing that happened, and, you know, they think they can mess up and then just come by with a present. It doesn't work like that. But, you know, because there's the concern, if you tell people some of these vulnerable areas or these things about you that for you are quite maybe difficult or very personal to share, that they might misuse that information in the future. And I don't know if there's a trust thing.
So I'm interested in what you're saying there, because I'm really aware that, you know, now through the work that I've done, I've got a lot of capacity to pretty much talk about everything and anything. And I regularly have this chat with my friend who trained with me, you know, in psychotherapy. And the conversations we have now, we realize that we talk about everything from every level. There's nothing that's out of bounds. And that's part, for me, that's part of the psychotherapy training, if I can get the right word out. That's really crucial. And it's a responsibility of ours to go through that process. So I'm aware that I've got an incredible amount of flexibility to talk about anything. With the right people, there's certainly still some vulnerability with me, and certainly still some struggles to share with certain people. But what's it like for you in that respect? You said something quite profound. Well, you said a couple of things along the lines of, I don't share my stuff with anybody, and I heard that I'm reading into it, but it's not easy for you to share certain things. So what's that like from your perspective in comparison?
Yeah, I mean, so I've done a lot of work, and I still continue to do a lot of work with me and emotions and expressing things. I guess at the core, my main rule now or principle on it is I don't want to say I'm an open book, but if you ask me, I'll tell you. I don't like to, figure out what I'll say when, all that stuff. It's too much effort. But I try my best, knowing that because I used to be a person who kept things here in my mind. And I'll have 5 conversations with myself before I decide which one's appropriate for you. So having overcome that, my approach now is more a case of capacity was a good word, I think, for you. Like I'm aware that I have quite a large capacity to be able to talk about a range of things, personal or whatever, or even, if it's opposing thoughts, like things I might not agree with, I can have that conversation and not take it personally. Not everyone can. So I try and calibrate a bit more. I try and match how much they're willing to share and not overshare, because that's what tends to happen when I think you can talk about anything. Because I used to be in situations where I'll share something with someone and you sort of left waiting for them to share something back, and you're like, oh, okay. It's just me. I'm the only one offloading heavy stuff today. Okay. It left, I feel like, there's a bit of maybe it goes to a trust scenario. So I think the trust is built with people where if I share something, if you're not comfortable, that's fair enough. But it becomes quite obvious if you share something rather deep or personal and the other person doesn't, you feel that disparity, you feel the gap, you feel the lack of something coming back. Not that it has to be reciprocal, so that they don't have to reciprocate, but if you keep being the only one sharing, as much as it's nice, it goes back to the feeling of they're getting to know me, I'm not getting to know them. Or sometimes, depending on what you're sharing, I'm sharing a lot of messed up stuff. Are they not messed up? What's going on here? I don't know if that answers your question, or if
there was other bits I was wondering, but it sort of goes back to some of what Ray was saying about whether or not we know how to do something, whether or not we know, and it's the same as me, isn't it? Some years ago, I didn't know how to share, and I will regularly say to clients in sessions, once upon a time, I had no idea where my feelings were and what they were. And I remember I'll loop this back in a moment, but talking about the body bit, because you said in the introduction about the psychosomatic stuff, which is really important for me and is something that I think is really crucial to therapy. Notes in the body, getting a language for the body. And we can talk about that in another podcast if you like at some point, if I'm invited back. If the ratings are up enough. No, I've not lost my train. But bringing it back to whether or not we've actually been shown something. And I remember my therapist saying, how are you feeling? What can you notice in your body? And I remember getting really pissed off at her and saying to her, I don't know what you're on about. I don't know when you're saying what my feelings in my body, what am I noticing? I remember saying, I don't know what you're on about. I don't know where they are. There was a disconnect almost between my head, because I was very cognitive, a bit like you said, Shai, in terms of thinking things through. That was my kind of power and how I kept myself safe. And there was just such a disconnect. So I could not get to them. I didn't know what she was on about. So it takes, like I said, it takes practice, it takes repetition, it takes learning. But to Ray's point, sometimes people don't know how to share. It's unsafe to share. It's really risky to share. They might have shared and it's come back on them. So working with clients, that's something to be really aware of. So if they share, I might say to them, what's that like sharing with me? How are you doing right now? If that is that something new that you've shared today? Yes, it is. How is that? What's that been like to share it with me? Notice what's happening for you, etc. But yeah, looping back to you is that other person just might not, they might want to share, but they don't know how to. They've not had it modeled. So yeah, you can often feel in that dummy, like, hang on a minute, I've said loads and you're not saying anything. It's another thing to be aware of in the way people relate to each other as relational human beings.
I agree. And obviously just taking in what you said previously, I think there's two major elements, or three per se, for the ingredients for every relationship you have from a younger stage all the way to your adult life and things like that. And I think one is the discovery element of it, two, the communication part of it, because those parts are very essential to any relationship, no matter how young you are, how old you are. It's just like, I contextualize it like oxygen to life. Without it, then it's pretty much going to die. Now, I was previously speaking to my sister about even what it means to, for instance, for her dad to basically take her down that aisle, and what it means, kind of thing, because essentially she was born, the first man in her life was my dad, and then she also had two other brothers to kind of help and support and be those male figures to kind of protect her. And as she's obviously gone on in life, she's also gone through what she's gone through. But what I was trying to emphasize is that we don't even realize, like, let's take for example marriage. When you're getting married and your father or that man figure is taking you down that aisle, he's transferring that responsibility he had of looking after you to that other person. And that's also the same as, like, a woman coming down the aisle, she's taking the responsibility of, you mentioned it previously in your last relationship, of being that mother figure, but more importantly being that friend, partner, and things like that. But that the mother figure is more, I perceive it as more when, I've got the man flu, I need looking after, that kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know. What's your thought regarding that?
In regards to, if I can just sort of say how I heard it then. So in regards to the responsibility that the dad gives onto the other partner, or
yeah, onto the other partner, and what the other partner kind of the responsibility they get, because again, it's also the unsaid rule, the unsaid things of when you go into, whether it's a marriage, a relationship, that I also have to give you validation on one way or another. I have to work on you the same way you work on me, because we're a collective team. And I don't think I don't know, I don't think that a lot of people have that full kind of understanding. As much as people want their, let's say for instance, the marriage and things like that, there's no one actually sits down and says, okay, in order for a marriage to work, so let's take for example, there's a wedding cake. For that wedding cake to look how it is and amazing and taste, it requires all these ingredients. And if you don't have all these ingredients and cook it to the right Fahrenheit, take it out, do the icing as and when you should, it's just going to look like excuse my language, a bunch of shit kind of thing. So, and then that's where you're kind of, fighting to kind of put the cake back in the oven, back and forth. And yeah, I mean, going back to the responsibility of validation of, from a young age and going into marriage kind of thing.
Yeah, that cake won't taste very nice, will it?
No, it's a bit salty. Oof.
I'll tell you how I heard that, and what it's making me think about is a comment that somebody made. I can't remember who it was, but it was many, many years ago. It might have even been some sort of podcast or workshop or something like that. And somebody said, when you're forging out a career, you ordinarily, you might put a lot of thought into it. You'll go for interviews, you'll work out who, if that company's right for you and you're right for them. You'll expect to have reviews and pay rises. And this person said, for some people, they put so much time and effort into their careers, and think it through and reflect on it. But we ordinarily don't pay the same attention to our relationships, and you can apply that to different aspects of lives. People that put a lot of thought into other things But you're right, we're not set up, we're not told about relationships. It's that expectation thing of, oh, we just meet somebody, fancy them, then we move in together. You know, for me anyway, it was kind of just a blind, without my eyes open, without any knowledge and guidance of like, okay, we meet at uni, then we move in together, then we buy a house, then we get married, and then we have kids. You know, it's just like, okay, is this what we do, without even knowing that's the ingredients and the cooking time and, you know, all of that, the utensils that you use. So there's so much more to it that we're just not taught. You know, so much of this would be really, really beneficial in the educational system and would save a lot of emotions, a lot of challenges, a lot of heartache, a lot of struggles in life, because our relationships have so much impact on the other aspects of our lives, don't we? If we're not feeling it in our relationship, when we're unsettled and we're arguing, we're battling, you know, that's going to have a major impact and it's going to filter into everything else. So if we knew this stuff about relationships from an early age, and I'm talking personally here, it would have made such a difference to know how I'm baking that cake and what I'm using and how long it needs in the oven and things like that. Is that the right response? So I kind of put my own spin on it, but does that tie into what you were thinking?
Yeah, definitely does.
I love that response, and I think link back to what you're saying about it coming from an early age as well. I wanted to hear a bit more about your dad, because I know we sort of said that we'll touch on that. I'd like to hear a bit more about that before probing a bit further about relationships some more.
Thank you for listening to Men Talk Ubuntu podcast and being a valued member of our community. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube, Instagram, and other social media now for access to our latest updates. DM us and let us know what your mental health is on a scale of 1 to 5. Thank you.
Yeah. Actually, when I reflected on being part of this podcast and I reflected on men's well-being and men's mental health, it was my dad that came into my mind. So I do think it's really pertinent because he's had such a big influence on me and my, you know, and every aspect. And now when I'm working with clients, I think about the men in my family. I think about my dad and my brother, one of my brothers in particular. So yeah, I'll talk about that. So he was very strict. He was very non-emotional. He was a farmer, and I say was because he died a couple of years ago. So that's part of the story that I'll share as well, because that was something I'm really reflecting on and something that had an impact, and I'll explain some of that. Yeah, he was really tough to please. He was really impatient. He was really angry. You couldn't, you know, it was either his way or the highway. It was really, really tough to please him. He always had a list of expectations and a list of chores. So yeah, he was a farmer and a logman and tree surgeon and gardener and all those things. So I was brought up on a farm to get up early and go and do the horses or the animals, whatever it was. And if you didn't get things right and get it done right the first time, then you were stupid and all other words would come out in terms of you're getting it wrong. So what I learned to do in my family unit was just basically be quiet and retreat and back off. And I grew up without much confidence. I grew up not knowing who I really was. I grew up with a sense of I'm different to the rest of my family and I don't know what my identity is. I'm just feeling really misunderstood and not having the guidance and the validation and the, you know, all of that I was really desperate for, that I needed, you know, back to some of the other points, because it was missing. I found him really tough. He was also in some circumstances really charismatic, really witty, had his own language, you know, he had his own words for things. And when I did a reading at his funeral, it was a fun one because actually he did impact a lot of people in that respect. He was funny, he was witty, got away with saying stuff that other people just would never say. He was really blunt. And so there were some windows of, you know, that I would find him really funny and I'd want to connect with him more. But what I've reflected on is when I connected with him, it was when other people were in the equation. And oddly enough, when I've had partners, I connected with my dad more. It's a bit of a phenomena in that respect. But when it was just me and him, I don't think he knew how to connect with me. And I do know that actually he wanted a son. And I do know when I was born, he said that. He said, oh, I was hoping for a boy. You know, so there was just a real disconnect I don't think he really knew how to respond to me. And that is a thing as well for some men. You know, it either happens from the moment their daughter's born, or when their daughter starts maturing and becoming a woman, there's a real shift and they think, oh, hang on a minute, I don't know how to handle this now. You know, my little girl's now a woman. So there's loads here that I think is just not talked about for men as well, and their experience of having daughters. But I get it from that perspective now, that he just had no idea how to relate to me. And so the only times I could really relate to him was when I was cutting hedges with him and doing the manual work, talking his language in terms of trees, animals. I used to get praise for being intelligent, you know, getting spelling, you know, high marks on spelling tests, or, you know, naming that tree and that breed of cow, or, you know, all of that stuff. Then I'd be like, oh, I've got my dad's recognition now. You know, he's seeing me, validating me. But it was only when I was talking his language that I could get that. So yeah, I spent quite a lot of years now, I know, and I didn't know this at the time, but treading on eggshells and always second guessing. There was a sense of I was the one that had to work hard to make the relationship okay. But none of this I was aware of until my dad died. I just didn't know. And I knew some of it through my therapy journey, but there's knowing and there's really knowing. And until he died, something really shifted for me in terms of my sense of self, my sense of self-worth, how I am in relationships, how I'm in romantic relationships. Something really, really shifted. And I thought, actually, I don't need to tread on eggshells anymore. I'm okay. I'm really good. And I'm not going to second guess anymore. I can now communicate. I'm important. You know, all these things shifted. But yeah, I believe he, because of his mental well-being, he stored a lot of toxic energy in his body. I believe, and some people may or may not agree, but I believe it contributed to his health, and he died of cancer. And I believe that contributed to it. You know, if we have a toxic, uninhabitable environment in our body, I believe it's more of a breeding ground for disease and ill health. And so it's how I've reflected on some of it. And actually it was the same for one of my brothers who also died of cancer. And I believe he held on to an awful lot of resentment, and hatred, and all sorts of anger from his childhood, and being really, really misunderstood and really devalued and not recognised at all. So my dad and one of my brothers really come to mind a lot when I'm working with male clients, because I know how difficult it was for my family to they just didn't even know what was happening. A bit like I said earlier, they didn't know how to express. And also one thing I really realized, there was a workshop I attended recently about being a therapist, you know, with men, working with men. And it was this guy called James Hawes, who's written a book called The Secret Lives of Men. And as he was talking, I really realized about the role model that my dad was. He was very alpha. And so I carry around this internalized sense of men have got to be men, even though I don't believe that. It's not how I am now, but it was modeled to me that men have got to be tough, they've got to be manual, got to, you know, and it was that real alpha. They don't show emotions, you know, and it really resonated. I think this James guy asked a question, and I thought, wow, I didn't even know to the degree that that's what my inner self believed, because of what my dad modeled. You know, he had no space for softer guys, zero time, zero tolerance, zero patience. You either spoke his language or you didn't. And I know that that's influenced my relationships and how I view partners I've been with, and whether or not they've been manual and man enough. And all of this has happened out of awareness for me. I didn't even know half of this at all. And it's not until this last couple of years and various things, and I've been able to reflect and think, oh my God, wow, that's what was modeled to me, and how, you know, we take on other people's stuff that's not ours, and it's a real contradiction for me. But yeah, he was a tough man to be around. You know, there were times he was fun, and you know, I will always say, in the last few months of his life, I spent with him pretty much a lot of that, you know, those days in hospital, and we actually bonded. And it was the first time. So I was 40 when he died, and it was the first time in my life in 40 years where I remember, or I sense, it may have been different when I was born, that me and my dad connected. He held my hand. I rubbed cream into his feet and his hand. I'm thinking, when I was doing it, thinking, oh wow, like Jesus, like I've not done this before. This is weird. But it was a funny but really lovely moment of rubbing cream into my dad's feet and hands. And he softened, and it was the most incredible thing. He really softened. He opened up. He said sorry to me one day, you know, and that moment, you know, he's never said sorry to me ever. So there's something happened for my dad. He knew he was really sick. He knew some, you know, and something shifted in him where he just softened, and he let go of all that hard facade that he'd had, and he got in touch with his emotions, and he let me in, and we bonded. And because I remember the first when he first went into hospital, I remember this nurse sort of wiggled one of his toes, and I remember thinking and seeing that and thinking, I could never do that to my dad. That is it too intimate. But that nurse has just done that. It was a really strange realization for me. But by the end, I was that person doing that with him. And so I'll always cherish those last 3 months, but the rest of it was really tough at times. And there's been a lot of reflection and realization since.
Amazing. May your soul rest in peace. Really grateful you shared that with us. And again, it also goes in terms of what I said with the whole marriage thing. So unconditionally, without even you realizing, you most probably have come across relationships with, you know, all the characteristics and ingredients of your father to kind of be in those relationships. And, you know, that's what men do as well, whether it's that mother figure or that woman figure. That's what we kind of do, because we still want, you know, elements of that connection to feel validated in a way. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, my heart was just filling with all sorts of emotions and stuff as you were recanting that. And yeah, thank you as well. And I think a lot came out of it. I want to go into more, but I'm also mindful of time. But one of the images that came to mind for me was almost like being in a boxing ring or training for anything at an elite level. And I feel like your journey of reflecting and engaging with therapy is like that. And for anyone, because it's years in the making to get you to where you are now. And God, I wanted to even ask you like whether that's changed how your intimacy has changed with partners now, because even that thing of rubbing someone's feet and just, it's not a commonly done thing. And if you grew up in a single parent household, there's so much swirling around in my head, but I digress. I think the key thing there is how much work it's taken you and continues to take you. And I don't say work to make it seem like it's an arduous chore, but I say it for anyone listening who might assume yourself or your relationship all will just be well. Like, it is, some people say love is a verb. Like, it takes action to love yourself and to love someone else. And it takes you questioning what that looks like, what you need, and also what you want. And I want to thank you actually, for sharing a lot of some of those experiences that you've had. And that it's such a powerful image, you know, to go from this complex relationship and to see this man who's probably a giant in your mind, and then probably see him reflecting and being softer after a lifetime of being hard in the bed, and you having to help him because he's probably been on the move all the time, always had something to do. Like you say, farmer is doing the garden stuff, he's doing all sorts, always busy, always got something on. And now he has to sit down, he has to sit with his thoughts. And ultimately, you're one of the people who's right there, and even with your siblings. And loss is never easy, no matter what your relationship is. When someone goes, like, there's something else that happens. There's other pathways or links that open up about that person, and it leaves you feeling a certain way. So again, thanks for sharing that, and encouraging, I suppose, other people to do the same by simply doing that. Ah, gosh, yeah, we definitely need to keep this going. But so I want to transition into the final few questions that we have. Before we get into it, I want to ask you a quick surprise question.
I hate surprises.
I hate them too, but hey, the unknown. Because I'd be remiss if I let you go without asking this. When should we not get into relationships? Like, when is it a good time to perhaps take pause on actually getting into a relationship and figure stuff out for yourself, or get to a certain space for yourself?
I might answer this in two ways, because it's reminding me of a conversation I was having the other day. I'll say this bit first, actually, and then I can get to the other bit. So I was always previously on the understanding in some regards of, if the partner I'm with is pissing me off, it's, I'm getting upset, they're triggering me, all of those things, which I wasn't aware of before, how I was being triggered and what. But, if you're struggling in that respect in relationship, then that's a bad relationship. And ordinarily your friends might say, oh, they're a this or they're a that, don't waste your time on them. But I've flipped that on its head to some degree. And there are some relationships which you have to step away from. But I think there's a large proportion of relationships that people flee from, when actually, if they were to know what was really playing out and sit in that discomfort, there could be some amazing growth there. And linking everything we've spoken about in terms of learning about each other, learning to validate, practicing loads of things. But I think actually your partner that's meant to be is going to trigger you, is going to do things in that respect, and you're going to, the communications break down, it's going to remind you of your relationship with the caregivers and stuff like that. But I used to run away from that and think, this is too much, this is not right, I'm getting upset, they're doing my head in, they're this, they're that. But actually, there's something I've really learned about, okay, well, what if it's because actually they're familiar to me and they're triggering me in the ways that they should do if they're the right partner for me? So that's a bit of I've deviated a little bit from your question, but I think there are a lot of relationships a lot of people run away from and are told by their friends and family, oh, they're no good for you. When actually, if we knew what we knew some of what we're talking about today, we might go, oh, maybe it's just that they're challenging me and triggering me. Maybe this could be all right if we worked at it. But it's knowing that there are some relationships that are unsafe to be in, and that there's obviously a line there. But sometimes, for me, growth only comes from when you sit in the discomfort, and sitting in that discomfort is about being curious. So it's a case of learning to notice, all right, this feels uncomfortable, I wonder what's going on for me, and then using your curiosity of being curious, like, okay, what's happening for me here? Is this something I can learn about, something I can reflect on? Do I want to have a different experience around this? If so, can I be curious, and can I sit in this discomfort to have a different outcome? Because if we just keep avoiding this discomfort, we're just going to have the same output, the same end result, and we're going to have those relationship patterns that we all, that often people say, I still keep meeting the same person, it ends up the same way. Well, sometimes we've got to step into that discomfort and challenge ourselves gently and take some risks to get a different outcome. So that's something I've really, really learned about an awful lot. And I've kind of lost your original question. When shouldn't we? Oh, yeah. So about self-awareness, self-growth. I think this is different for everybody. But I will tell you my personal experience. I certainly know that it was really good for me to have some time to be single for quite a while, to really actually find my sense of self, understand what my boundaries were, understand my expectations, to tune into my thoughts and my feelings, and not to be reliant on somebody else or want, needing somebody else to make me happy and needing someone else to be there. So for me personally, I know that I needed that gap. Everyone's a little bit different, but perhaps a lot of people could actually benefit from stepping back that bit and having that bit of space to understand themselves. But, everyone is really, really different. It depends on how deep your wounds are and what you're carrying into a relationship. There are some people who find relationships that bit easier and aren't triggered, so it'd be different for them. But if somebody is struggling and stuck in relationships, then perhaps if they're able to take a step back and focus on themselves, that I would imagine that it's going to be really beneficial. Have I answered your question, Shai?
You certainly have.
So let's press on, shall we? So we've got these fire questions ready for you. What what resources do you hope people can still use 100 years from now?
What resources? Other people, because I'm really aware of the influence of and the dominance of technology and how removed people are, and how, especially when I work with the younger clients and they talk about how their phone is there, they can't let go of their phone. It's the thing, they go to bed looking at it, they wake up, where is it? So I would say other people.
That's beautiful. Like, we should all go through life seeing other people as a resource, not a burden, not a headache, like an actual resource there to make us better and make our life better, this journey of life better. That's nicely put. Final question on the quick fire is, what do you wish more men talked about?
I'm trying not to be just general here, because it's easy to say emotions. That's an easy one. So I'd like to be more specific. But what do more men talk about? I guess it's more actually what they struggle with. It's okay to say if you're struggling. What more men talk about? Yeah, the sort of the taboos, and if they are struggling. So yeah, not just emotions in general. If they are stuck, if they are struggling, to be able to say that. There's some bravery in that. It's not brave to actually cut off from that and to be strong. There's more bravery in actually saying that I am struggling now. So yeah, that rather than just emotions in general.
Whew, fantastic. Carol, we really appreciate your time. I mean, we're all about promoting positive perceptions of Black men and mental health. And I think even just giving people this example of other people who are out there doing positive things, trying to help other people, help their community, just everything you've said from the beginning of this conversation about helping people understand themselves and their relationships, and how, I guess, profoundly that could change their lives. I mean, like, you've transitioned into a different career, just like a lot of other people, probably, especially because of the pandemic, might be having to consider taking that step. You've been extremely courageous and brave, I want to say, in confronting a lot of the internal struggles or thoughts, even reflecting on all of your experiences and choosing to take action, not to sort of despair, if you will, and get stuck in just, resisting, looking back, and they say what you resist will persist. But you've been very proactive and a great example of what is possible if you choose to confront some uncomfortable truths. Like, life can get better, things can get even better, and it's wonderful, very refreshing to hear, to see. And if anyone ever had any concerns about going for a therapy session, I mean, come on now, how can you not just, like, I want to call Carol right now, hey, call the old lady and book an appointment this weekend, because this shows that even things like therapy aren't just for when we're in a moment of crisis. Like, these are things we can do just to be healthier and to have healthier relationships with ourselves, with our partners, with our friends, with our families, if they're at that level. But even just starting with yourself, however old you are, young, old, however you categorize yourself, whatever your orientation, like, these are helpful, and I love the point about men talking about whatever they're struggling with, even women, whatever you're struggling with. If you're not quite sure how to process it, reach out, because someone can help you. figure that out. It might not take a day. It might take a year. Who knows? It might take a lifetime. But the key thing is you'll enjoy the rest of that lifetime and you'll still be here. And that's really, really important. It's very important that you are. With that said, Carol, if some of our lovely listeners do want to connect with you, follow you, figure out what you're up to, what's the best way for them to connect?
So I have a website, which is all the w's.carolmaynard.co.uk. So Carol without an E, Carol, Maynard.co.uk. And then also two of the directories that you'll find me on are called Psychology Today and Counselling Directory. They're the two most prominent ones. And they're the two I would recommend. I'm also on Bark as well. There's another one that I use. With those, you can actually specify the sort of therapist you're looking for. You can find somebody in the right area. But I'm on those as well, so you can find me on those. But they're really useful tools to help me to find a therapist in general.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. I just also wanted to put my 2 pence in at the end as well. Carol, it's an absolute honor and pleasure to have had you here today. We appreciate your validation, the insight you've given us, the conversation, the insightful, impactful conversations we've had, everything from, the doles of the different transition we're all related to, all the way through to the cake, the operating system, and, to the listeners, may the operating systems be with you. If in doubt, Carol is here. But no, I think the biggest takeaway for me is discovery and communication, which I'm in a fortunate place to always be discovering, communicating, learning, and as I said at the beginning, outstanding but improving. So that's my motto, that's my mantra, and that's what I'm going to go with. If anyone else wants to use that as well, it's copyrighted, you're going to have to ask for my permission. But Carol, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. It's been lovely. I've really enjoyed it.
As have I. Hey, life's an adventure, and I hope you keep having fun on yours. Hope you enjoyed listening as much as we enjoyed creating.
Don't forget to follow, like, share, and connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our latest episode and listen to any you missed. And tune in next episode.
Take care.